Hello everyone, let's visit critical reading and response. And the main issue this time is when reading and analyzing literature, what can we focus on to be termed as doing critical reading? And in this audio, I want to highlight a few things that would be important when one is reading a text critically. And this comes to mind because critical reading and response cannot exist in a vacuum. By that, we mean we cannot just keep talking and thinking or imagining critical reading and response as something that's amorphous. No, it must be something that's based on something. And from a literary perspective, therefore, I want us to agree that we cannot talk about critical reading and response away from a text. There must therefore be the idea and the intention of a particular text which we purpose to read and analyze critically. When we talk about literary text this time, text can be a print text or an audio. And therefore, in critical reading and response, we can still invite the idea of critical listening and response because tone and intonations, stress markers, all matter in terms of the meaning we infer from a text that's communicated to us orally for us to get the meaning by way of listening. But when you come to the written text, the text that exists in print form, then we must use our eyes and read. And by the time we are reading, this time we are not reading for fun. And the fact that we are reading it with a specific focus and purpose, which is to discern meaning, serious meaning, which the writer purposes to discuss or to shed light on and to bring to the reader's attention. We are doing critical reading. And therefore, critical reading can be understood as any act that is purposeful and intentional to extract a specific type of meaning which another looks forward to discussing or shedding light or bringing to the attention of the reader. In this audio, however, what's most important is what elements, aspects, or branches that we can utilize in order to gain maximally from a literary text. In this case, I want us to mention several items which I think are very important. And number one is the text. You may all agree with me, literature is all about analyzing things, analyzing books that are written where language has been used creatively. And therefore, the most important thing in critical reading and response is the book you lay your hands on. The text, number one. When you're analyzing the text, therefore, in critical reading and response, your aim and intention is to extract specific and particular meaning which you think or which you look forward to uncovering as what may have made the writer to come up with that text. That will therefore bring us to the next item, which we shall look at when we delve into the text. And we can use words that are very common in literature to talk about this, because again we can break it down into several other levels. And number one is what we may call themes. And what's a theme? Basically, a theme can be understood as the basic idea which a writer wants to share with the reader. When doing critical reading and response, therefore, we cannot avoid facing the issue of what's the main issue, what's the main idea, what's the theme that the writer discusses with the reader. But most importantly, in critical reading and response is the question, why? Why do we think this theme is important based on how it's presented in this text? The importance of a theme and the meaning it draws to the reader defines the purpose as to why the writer may have thought of it as something worth being written about. Writers do this by using characters. And in this case, therefore, we cannot avoid the issue of characters. Critical reading and response, therefore, involves analysis of meaning based on what the writer shows the reader through the actions of different characters and what fate befalls them. In addition, the writer uses language creatively to convey certain meaning. Up to this point, we have identified the following elements of a literary text that are important when analyzing a text critically. Number one, themes. Number two, characters. And we would still say that the text is still now the item we are dealing with. However, I would want you to agree with me that characters in a text don't exist in a vacuum, because they are based on what readers can identify with based on what happens in real-life society. And in this case, we can then analyze a text critically by asking ourselves the relationship between the characters as they are presented in the text and the society that informs such reflections. And that's where we would say that that's the point literature and society comes in contact. At the same time, therefore, we cannot analyze a text critically by divorcing it from the reality that led to its creation. Where are we leaving the writer or the sole author? Critical reading and response at the same time cannot wish away the writer wholesomely, because readers and writers can be said to be in a dialogue through what's happening in a literary text. And therefore, in this case, we may all agree that if we all were to write a given literary text, a poem, a novel, a play, we would not have used the same words exactly as a given writer does. We may not have presented particular themes the way a given writer presents them. And therefore, in critical reading and response, it's paramount to question the writer. And in this case, we should do it radically. Let's ask even harder questions as to why a given writer presents particular themes and characters the way they are presented. Because that's what makes it critical. That's what critical is anyway. And in this case, therefore, and in questioning the writer, we must still ourselves right into what may have informed a writer's conscience, a writer's purpose, a writer's intention. But how do we do that? There are instances in a literary text where the writer addresses the reader directly, and there are instances when the writer addresses the reader through the characters. By interrogating, or questioning rather, what a writer opts to tell the reader and why, by asking why, and by questioning critically how words are used to influence the reader's thoughts, mind, and reflections about meaning, which the writer thinks is what he or she is communicating to the reader, we again are able to advance our practice of literary criticism and response by questioning the writer. And that can be done by asking the question, why? This again brings us to the question of language. A writer may use irony, satire, sarcasm, inversions, and all these elements of language have a direct and an indirect function, or what may be termed as explicit and implicit meaning. We shall continue with interrogating the writer in a different audio, but for now, allow that we mention something about the reader, because it's another very important aspect of critical reading and response, because it's said beauty belongs to the eye that defines it. In this case, we want to say the following: the knowledge, wisdom, and experience you bring to a text as the reader again defines what you get from it. And therefore, we must question ourselves as readers in critical reading and response. And this time, we must be very clear in our minds as to what biases, what strengths, what weaknesses are we bringing to the text to inform and influence our analysis. And the importance of doing this is that we may guard ourselves against personal weaknesses, what we may call subjective reading of a text, so that we can popularize what you think is what is important at the expense of the society and the world. And therefore, by questioning what interpretations we are making from a written text, be it written, print, audio, whatever, we cannot afford to be subjective in how we interpret meaning, but rather we should always try and look at the bigger picture of what we are bringing to the text in terms of our strengths and weaknesses of our reasoning capacity. We shall revisit the question of sound argument in another audio, where again we shall look at some of the things we need to avoid when doing critical reading and response as readers, since they could be wrong. And a good example is what we may call logical fallacies. If you read a text where a farmer becomes angry because the crop has failed as a result of drought, and then you say, yeah, this farmer, I knew, he's dull-headed. Don't you think you're insulting the person instead of examining his or her argument? And therefore, we shall come back to the issue of the correctness of our reason and how we need to interrogate meaning without committing the logical errors known as fallacies. Up to this point, we have mentioned the following elements which are very important when doing critical reading and response. Number one, the text. Number two, we have mentioned the issue of themes as the main topics or issues a writer would want to discuss with the reader. We have also mentioned the importance of characters and how they are used to convey meaning. We have also mentioned the importance of how language can be used creatively to convey explicit and implicit meaning. Additionally, we've talked of the society that inspires a writer to come up with a given work in order to shed light in what kind of meanings we need to get from a text based on the society that may have led to its creation. We have also mentioned the writer as an important element of a text in critical reading and response, so as to enrich our analysis by questioning why a writer may have come up with a given text. And finally, we've mentioned ourselves as readers, or the reader, as something or an element or an aspect of critical reading and response that cannot be left uninterrogated.